Wonderful. Thank you everyone for joining. My name's Katie. I'm from Boomerang Labs, and I'm very excited to be uh, hosting today's webinar. We have Chris and Mayuri online this morning. Very excited to chat to them about future-proofing supply chains, specifically taking two quite different perspectives or different roles in the circular economy and hearing from them both about what strategies they're employing, they're seeing, they're hoping to see more of in 2026, where we're seeing more and more pressures in terms of geopolitical disruption, resource scarcity, climate events, and tightening regulatory frameworks. So before we get started, I will just go through a few introductory slides that we like to do every time we have a webinar to make sure everyone knows who we are at Boomerang Labs. As I mentioned, this is today's topic. I'm very grateful to have Mayuri from Envada and Chris from Hunter Joint Organisation joining us. And Boomerang Labs acknowledges the traditional custodians and lands on which we all work and gather today. For me, that's the Wanneroo people of the Eora Nation. Oh, not the Eora Nation, I'm getting mixed up. That's Sydney. Sorry, normally tuning from Sydney or the Hunter, I'm getting them joined together. We extend our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Boomerang Labs, if you're not familiar with our work, it is around supporting the transition to circular economy through supporting entrepreneurs and small businesses specifically, as well as more broadly, the adoption of circular behaviours and actions in industry, government, and not-for-profits. We provide support for startups at all stages, from early stage, where maybe it's just an idea before they've even hit the ground running, through to late stage startups and scale-ups that are expanding nationally and internationally. These events are a really big part of us keeping in touch with what's happening in the ecosystem and doing our bit to educate people on the topics that are becoming more and more important. We have our next webinar lined up. It'll be a co-webinar with, or co-branded webinar with Rocket Seeder. We're looking at AI on farms, so specifically focusing on the agricultural space, but looking at regeneration, looking at resource efficiency, and looking at technology, which is front of mind in 2026 and every year, I think, forever going forward in ag and all industries. So really excited to have this hands-on workshop next month. Taylor will put that link into the chat if he hasn't already. I would love to see you along for that one too, for a little bit of a different topic compared to what we normally address. And without further ado, I will stop sharing screen. I'm really excited, like I said, to be joined by Chris from Hunter Joint Organisation and Mayuri from Envada. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to start with Chris, who's going to give a presentation, followed by Mayuri, and then we will have a Q&A. I will have a few questions of my own, but as always, we love to get questions from the audience. Please don't wait until Q&A. If you have questions, chuck them in the chat, and we'll go through them in order as much as we can. This is your chance to find out all the details you're interested in, as well as sitting back and relaxing for the first bit as we have presentations. So thank you so much, Chris, if you want to kick us off.
Thanks, Katie, and g'day, everyone. Thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to be able to come and talk to you a little bit about my perspective on the role of the circular economy in supply chain resilience. Now, let me fumble with my slides. All right. Have you got those?
Yep, we can see that. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So, my name's Chris. I work at the Hunter Joint Organisation of Councils. Before I get into it, I'd just like to acknowledge the country and the history of the traditional custodians of the lands from where I am, which is the Wanneroo people too, coincidentally. Katie and I are both in Maitland, so it's the Wanneroo people. But our region in the Hunter is made up of traditional owners or many different traditional nations. So I'd like to pay my respect to all of those and to those from where you're dialing into from today too. So just by way of introduction, I work at the Hunter Joint Organisation of Councils. The Hunter region is located in New South Wales, so I guess broadly around Newcastle is the major city on the eastern coast and the eastern portion of our region. You can see a little map there. And the Hunter Joint Organisation itself is made up of 10 member councils. So we're a statutory local government. organisation, really a collaborative body that has 10 member councils. And we've got some statutory functions that include getting those councils to collaborate, do strategic planning, advocating to other levels of government. But we also run a range of programs where there's, I guess, a collaborative interest in getting those councils to work together. And an example of that is that we serve as the EPA's, the New South Wales EPA-funded regional waste group for our region. So my job is, as the regional waste coordinator, is to work largely with the waste and sustainability teams in each of those councils to, again, get them collaborating to deliver and improve the way that waste and resource recovery and services are delivered. And we have our own strategy called the Regional Circular Materials Strategy. If you Google that, Hunter Circular Materials Strategy, you will find it. It's a response to the state government waste and sustainability sustainable materials strategy. It just sets out how we're going to contribute to that, and through that strategy, our councils have given us a mandate to sort of broaden the scope of our program away from waste a little bit and look more at circular economy initiatives. So we're not just, while a lot of my work is working on that, I guess, downstream waste and resource recovery sector, we also do quite a bit of upstream work. We're looking at how councils can take up circular products and improve the circularity of their operations too. So, we're always looking at linkages between the waste that councils handle and I guess the products that they procure, and increasingly we're trying to tie those two things together to create a bit of demand pool. I'll talk a little bit about that today. I just wanted to start by referring to some metrics from the CSIRO. I recently went to a webinar on their recently released circularity metrics for Australia's states and territories report, and this is a great report. I thought it's it's amazing. It's obviously they've analysed some really high level data and circularity metrics. But what I find really great about this is that they've given some quite practical and clear takeaways and made a few policy recommendations about how we can see or drive some improvement in those metrics. So I'd really encourage you to have a look at this report. Sounds kind of dense and scary, but I assure you it's actually not. It's a really interesting report. And it was led by Dr. Heinz Schandell and Dr. Alessio Miato at the CSIRO. They ran a webinar on this recently. So, yeah, check it out. Now, I've tried to reduce this to my own level with some key takeaways. And what I found, just some really brief, interesting takeaways from this report were their definition on circular economy. Firstly, they pointed to the fact that the circular economy is about getting more out of the materials circulating in our economy, which I think is a definition that we're all familiar with. But interestingly and relevant to this webinar is that they said that it's a key way of increasing supply chain resilience in Australia by retaining materials domestically, and it's also going to be a useful method of reducing reliance on overseas markets and the shocks that are associated with those. Three, I guess, takeaways from the metrics in that report were that Australia's material footprint is increasing. So that's, the amount of material that we're using per capita in Australia, and those resources need to come from somewhere. Australia's material productivity, so that's the economic output per unit of material, is very low, but it is increasing, which is encouraging. To me, what that means is really, or what that points to, is that Australia is very good extractor and exporter of raw materials, but we're not good value adders to those materials, and we're not good at reprocessing the materials circulating in our economy. And that leads, I guess, to the circularity rate, which is a reflection of the amount of secondary materials, reused materials or recycled materials that make up the total materials used in our economy, and that currently sits at 4.4%. So it's very, very low. And again, just points to the fact that we do still have a largely linear economy. That sounds a little bit, I guess, a bit depressing in some ways, but I think that actually points to the fact that there's a huge opportunity in this country to change the way that we're doing things and increase our resilience to supply shocks. Now, because I'm a local government guy, I'm going to talk a little bit about supply chain risks in local government, and specifically I'll talk a bit about waste here, but I think it applies to supply chains more broadly. So, as you may be familiar with, that in Australia, local government often becomes the custodian of society's waste. So, for example, in the Hunter region, councils operate almost all of the waste facilities, and they handle almost all of the waste in some way, whether that's municipal waste or whether that's commercial, industrial, or construction and demolition waste. A lot of it goes through the council facilities in our region. And unfortunately, a lot of the resource recovery programs that councils do run are heavily reliant on overseas markets, or they're reliant on a very limited domestic market. So maybe one or two actors, which makes us very vulnerable to shocks in those systems. Those shocks can cripple a supply chain, and I'll talk about some examples in a second. But in the past we've seen this lead to stockpiling. We've seen it lead to increased landfilling of useful materials and increased costs to the community. And that last point really is a reflection of the fact that local government exists in a very revenue constrained environment, right? They don't, the way local government operates and collects revenue is highly regulated, and that means that they're always going to be mindful of cost increases. Ultimately, if a costs do increase for resource recovery services, council will have a limited ability to absorb those. That will generally lead to landfilling if unfortunately a supply chain fails, and the community will ultimately wear the increased cost for this. Now, I think that's obviously quite a waste focused slide, but councils are exposed to supply chain risks in a lot of other areas too. They're infrastructure providers, they're service providers. So if costs increase in those areas too, that places a lot of pressure on council. And I think the circular economy, or what I'm going to talk a little bit about today, is that there is a lot of opportunities for the materials that are being handled by a local government to be sort of processed to extract a greater degree of value, and ultimately secure or shore up the supply chains that feed into other council operations. Some recent shocks that we've seen, and I'm sure a lot of these will be familiar to you, are the China sword in 2018, and then the export ban on waste through a piece of federal legislation, the Recycling and Waste Reduction Act, which led to the collapse of several recycling markets, famously RedCycle, but soft plastic and plastic in general, which was heavily reliant on overseas markets. That really crippled that industry, those changes. The Cleanaway fire at their St Mary's facility in 2025, that was effectively New South Wales's only processing facility for hazardous waste. And while that's a domestic market, I think that shows that the limited number of actors in that market created a huge risk to the supply chain. Of course, the Middle East conflict that's ongoing has meant that access to export markets for a lot of waste types has been restricted, and in particular textiles. There's a waste management review article that basically, I guess, shed light on the fact that almost a huge amount of the textiles that are going through the charity sector in Australia really reliant on export markets through the Middle East for recovery. And in lieu of that, and with the restrictions on that, a lot of that material is now destined for landfill, unfortunately. So a real supply chain risk. And of course, fuel shortages and price increases place a lot of pressure on a huge number of supply chains. But I think that showed us that there's an opportunity in this country to try to develop biofuels and alternate fuels from materials like organic waste. So a shock like that has piqued a bit of interest in that, and there's a real opportunity in that area. And finally, the pandemic, the Ukraine-Russia war, has impacted supply and prices of commodities and materials, particularly in energy and construction. And again, that's a huge area of potential for the circular economy to provide onshore or domestic supply of energy and construction materials. Where do I see the opportunities? So, I guess these are three or four key areas that I think there's a really big opportunity and that we lack a little bit in Australia at the moment. The first of those is the development of domestic circular economy infrastructure. I think we've got a real dearth of that in Australia. It will help us to reduce reliance on overseas markets, and it will also help us, really importantly for council, to reduce costs, add value to the materials that are being handled, and enable some higher order secondary uses through aggregation and processing. So, I guess examples of that practically in a council sense is consolidated and shared infrastructure in our region would go a long way to solving a lot of the cost pressures that councils have in trying to engage in circular economy initiatives. Oftentimes the logistics of moving around low value raw materials, I guess you'd call them, is just simply does not provide a positive business case for councils to provide circular economy or recovery initiatives, and that is really holding us back in local government, unfortunately. So, if we can develop better, I guess more sophisticated processing aggregation infrastructure, it'll give us a lot more control over where we send those materials to, what markets we engage, and also add value to those materials such that you're reducing some of the costs that you, as the handler of that material, have to wear. Importantly, I think we need to create demand for secondary markets. The recovery and the recycling infrastructure is simply just not going to do anything if there's no demand for the products or the materials that are coming out of those. For example, we can do this through public procurement. We can do it by placing requirements on organisations to report and reduce their Scope 3 emissions. We can do it through implementing minimum recycled content standards. But it's really important that we focus on that demand pull side of the equation to ensure that the developers and the operators of the recovery initiatives and infrastructure can derive some income from it, and it's not they're not doing so just by imposing gate fees on the waste producers, for example. Coordination of stakeholders, materials, and markets. We need to make sure that we give confidence to the investors and the developers of infrastructure by bringing them feedstocks and making land and markets available to them so that their investments are viable. And finally, I think product stewardship and EPR, which is expanding, is a necessary precondition to ensure that the producers and those who are introducing these materials and products into the economy are making a contribution to the systems which ultimately deal with them at their end of life. And just a couple of examples of the work that we're doing to try to achieve those things is we've got a couple of projects running. So the first I want to talk about is the low carbon concrete project, which has been supported by New South Wales DQ and the New South Wales EPA. This has involved working with our member councils to, create demand through increased uptake of low carbon and recycled content concrete. So it's been it's a change management project. We're trying to build awareness and understanding of these products in councils and how they can be applied, mitigate the risks or the perceived risks around them, and then provide some practical resources through procurement specifications to help councils actually buy this material. Now, concrete's obviously a really critical, widely used resource, and there's engineers concerned about the performance of them. So this has been a really involved and an ongoing involved process to ensure that they understand, what these products are and how they can be used. We have a textile value chain solutions project that's funded by the New South Wales EPA, and it's focused on identifying opportunities to improve textile circularity in our region and the supply chain in the region. So firstly, we're having a look at where value is being lost in that supply chain, and the next phase of the project will be to work with stakeholders and solution providers to support the uptake of those solutions and try to increase the circularity rate of textiles moving around our region. And finally, we have a regional waste infrastructure strategy under development too. So per, the point on my last slide about ensuring that we as feedstock handlers and as a group of councils are coordinating to support the modernisation of the waste infrastructure and resource recovery infrastructure in our region. We're developing a long-term plan that looks at where the opportunities are going to be for councils to, switch from a very landfill-heavy waste management model in the future to looking at sort of consolidated, more sophisticated infrastructure that will support higher order outcomes for the waste materials flowing around our region. I think an example of that will be with organics and FOGO. A lot of that is still being processed into compost, which is in many ways fine, but there are processes that are far more sophisticated that can extract greater value from those materials, but they require coordination from the feedstock providers, being councils, to make sure that the investors or the developers of those projects can be certain that they're going to get a return on their investment. And that is it from me. So you can, my details are on the screen there. Feel free to give me, shoot me an email or give me a call if there's anything you want to follow up on. And you can check out our work on our website if you Google Hunter JO. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Chris. I've got a couple of questions written down, but I might wait till after Mayuri's spoken because I'm sure you'll both have great answers for us. So thank you so much for your presentation. Yes, next we'll pass over to Dr. Mayuri. If you're there, Chris, if you just want to remove never mind, your screen's gone. I spoke too soon. And yeah, here you are, Mayuri. Thank you.
Awesome. I hope I can be heard. Sharing my screen now.
Yeah, it's great.
Let me get started. Alrighty, here I am, and joining from Sri Lanka. So I'm originally from Melbourne, and I reside in the lands of voluntary Voivaram people. But today it's early morning start for me here in Sri Lanka. So hello to all of you. I thought I'll give a little bit of an intro about Anvata before I start. So I think we have been in this space wearing many hats, and more recently, we kind of consolidated what we do under a few sort of strategic arms. And if I call ourselves with one name, I would call ourselves transition specialist. We are driving transition and market acceleration of circular initiatives. So in the broad theme of helping organizations to become regenerative, we are specialized in helping innovations and solutions towards a circular and low carbon economy to be competitive in markets. And a couple of sort of themes or arms that we operate in doing this. We are active in research and innovation, education, capability building, advisory and strategic foresight, and consulting and transformation support. So on the research side, have worked with a number of organizations in the last couple of years. So our mix is actually quite interesting. We work with government institutions, public sector institutions, universities who have research to bring to market, as well as the corporate sector and schemes like product stewardship organizations and industry bodies. So some of them are in a very sort of I would say high-level space where you talk about policy or skills or a theme like that. But then some of them are very material and material stream focused, where you kind of bring about change. I think one of the more interesting projects we did recently was this project with Paintback, where we kind of help them evaluate strategies to position themselves to be competitive in markets. Some of the other initiatives we do, we are building a course hub with stackable micro-credentials with some courses which have been released recently and some are under development. So if you are interested, get in touch with me, happy to share. This is for professional development for professionals across the organization on circular economy transition. On the other three, I wouldn't talk much, but it's more to share that even though we are a consulting, we kind of finally go as a consulting company, a lot of what we do is also like a think tank. So we do develop in-house tools, decision tools, guides, business transition and self-assessment tools. Some of them are at development stage, some of them which we use for projects. And one of the primary aims, as I mentioned, is to help alternatives towards a circular economy to be competitive in markets. And we work both on the push side to bring solutions to market, as well as to create demand for them through other strategic tools. So while we work on policy and strategy, on the last part on C is actually a lot more quantitative studies like life cycle assessment, supply chain modeling, material flow assessment, diagnostic studies, which are quite quantitative in helping to assess risks and competitiveness. So that's a little bit about us. Let me move forward with what this is my quick bio. I think probably Katie gave a brief intro. I've been in the space for 22 years. I think one of the quick things to share about an interesting project that I'm into now. So at the moment, there's quite a few projects I do in Asia Pacific. We have active projects in Sri Lanka, and I'm active in the project with the Philippines at the moment. So I'm the lead strategy expert in working with 6 other national consultants in developing a circular economy roadmap for the Philippines, which I like a lot due to the impact it makes, as well as a very interesting project active at the moment. Alrighty, I want to go to the main parts of the presentation. The topic I want to start with is when we talk about supply chain activation or resilience. I think more recently, probably the last decade or so, we have been trying to anchor the fact that circular economy creates competitive advantage. And I think with the last, probably last 1 or 2 years, or probably a little bit more, with the economic climate we're experiencing, there's a lot of emphasis on resilience. And I mentioned to you briefly about this project that I do at the Philippines, which is a developing country, preparing a developing national level framework and a roadmap. And we work a lot there to tie the benefits of circular economy to resilience, economic resilience. So the core role of circular economy, as I see applying to especially public sector context. I mean, I understand a lot of the people who are attending are from public sector, so I kind of customize it a little bit towards them. So 4 core messages that we, how do I say, we want to go with and we communicate as well as it delivers is number 1 on value creation. We want to have circular economy as an initiative which creates value. How? It creates jobs, it activates service sector, it helps supply chain reduce value losses, and so many other ways. And then from a government perspective, it is an initiative for cost reduction. How? Because it unburdens the government on managing waste and handling waste management cost by themselves. By creating waste as a value-added resource, the burden of waste management is passed on to the market through market activation. So there's materials becoming valuable resources and they are being traded in the market, and the share of the cost of, I would say, waste is basically shifted and handled in a different way. Then, of course, we know that circular economy as a tool for environmental protection, not only decarbonization and pollution reduction, handling biodiversity because we conserve resources, and as well as so pollution reduction, decarbonization, and biodiversity protection. And number 4 is the one that I think which is just become quite important, especially after COVID, risk reduction in supply chains. By handling or rather managing the risks associated with global supply chains, because we promote local initiatives and also resilience in supply chains. You kind of rely less on natural resources. You have a way of where your resources end up. It builds resilience. So we try to drive all of these when we talk about circular economy strategy in a supply chain. I thought I'll sort of drill it down to one key question. I think this is the question we all want to handle, not just at market level, but also at industry and organizational level. How to make circular economy transition market driven. So how to make a business case for it not to be a cost borne by the government or the public sector, how to make solutions competitive, and how to create demand. So this is what I thought I'll address with what I'm sharing today. So I have a sort of a concept to share as well as a case study that I thought would apply to you. If you break down this picture into a couple of sort of elements, we can see a couple of things we got to sort of manage and handle and connect to work in an integrated way. So one main aspect as public sector is to make sure that we create an ecosystem that incentivizes transition. So I've mentioned about market instruments. I'll explain a little bit more about it in the next couple of slides. So when I say market instruments, they are instruments that help the supply chains to have to bear some of the external costs, externalities, and no longer that doing the right thing becomes it becomes profitable. So as an example, if we extract natural materials, if we have a tax on natural aggregate extraction, natural material extraction, suddenly it becomes less competitive, and you have a shift towards recycled materials incentivized. So in a similar way, you can apply market incentives at a number of places. So higher landfill levy, taxes on natural material extraction, incentivizing or subsidies given for recycling, encouraging investments of recycling through lower interest rates. For construction sector, as an example, if you have schemes like Green Star, which has which probably portrays a visible improvement or visible advantage for projects which are sustainability driven. So you can activate in a system in a broad way. So that's one. And number two, this is the last part, probably the second layer is what industries and corporate sector is mostly doing. You've got to create the push and create the pull. So push is about driving market competitive innovations. Pull is about creating demand by increasing adoption. So ideally for a system to work, you've got to sort of activate all of these three, and sometimes all of these three in an integrated and coherent way for it to work. So I have one example that I thought I'll share. This is to emphasize the need for, once again, working in an integrated and a coherent way. And the alternative I want to talk about is procurement, because procurement is such an important tool that that can be easily used as a low-hanging fruit. And if you want to go the full length, it's possible to do that too. The particular aspect I want to sort of draw your attention to is innovations in procurement. So when we talk about transition to a circular economy, we talk about circular procurement. And a lot of the times, alternatives we like to promote in the market are sometimes not there. We're talking about new type of material innovations, new designs, new ways of organizing supply chains, new technologies, new ways of distributing, like return models or sharing schemes, etc. So, and when we sort of interact with the market as public sector, we got to address some of their concerns related to risk. So from a market point of view, market would like to innovate, but there are some of the key questions. How do we manage our risks? It's risky for us to innovate on something financial wise. We don't know whether somebody would buy it. So outcome wise, and it takes time, which has a lot of risks and costs when it comes to R&D process. On the other hand, market asks, from the market, the innovators want to ask, is there demand? Is there opportunity to produce these things at scale? Should I invest? So you got to address this question in one way or the other for the solutions to come to the market. And some of the approaches that are typically taken mostly by the public sector. Sorry, my Zoom window is here. I'll probably shift it to the other side. Maybe that's better. By the public sector is how to incentivize innovation. And there are mainly two ways, a number of ways, but two main ways that we can think of. You're procuring the process of innovation, or you're guaranteeing procurement of outcomes of innovation. So in the first one, you're giving an R&D contract to someone. And in the second one, you're telling that do innovate, as long as it meets my outcome, I would guarantee buying it, which reduces their risk. And that is exactly what is practiced in what we call procurement for innovation. And we have an active case study, a very interesting case study in Australia by City of Greater Geelong, where they procured maintenance-free bridges through a procurement for innovation project. And if you want to get in touch, some of you are very sort of connected in the public sector councils, among councils. Tina Preferment at City of Greater Geelong is a great resource who would actually share more information about this. Moving on to the next slide. Now I can't move between slides. Give me a second. To remove the Zoom window. Sorry. Yeah. I hope I can move this. Give me a second. I'm trying to get to the arrow. Yeah, okay, cool. So talking about procurement for innovation, one of the ways to activate is you kind of had to do in an integrated way, because you are talking about something that is unmet, that currently there might be no solution in the market for this, and you got to invite the market to be creative. And typically in some of those projects, the engagement phase is quite long. There's additional supply education, there's opportunities you got to create for collaboration, get a few parties to come together and creatively, collaboratively innovate. And your evaluation in some of the procurement for innovation contracts is performance-based. So I mentioned about the City of Greater Geelong example. They didn't ask from suppliers to come up with, we want resource efficient bridges which are made of concrete. Rather, they made a very open outcome. We want bridges that are zero maintenance. And so in terms of materials, they had the room to innovate. In terms of how they deliver the project throughout, they had a room to innovate. So you kind of give a performance objective. It's outcome driven rather than specifications. And the last part is, in such things, you got to share the risks of innovation. And how do you do it? You do it through grants for R&D. You do it through risk reduction approaches by having different type of pricing or evaluation mechanisms to negate risks on price due to innovation. So this is as a whole system, when you in such a sort of a contract, you got to incorporate it in an integrated way to make the magic happen. So just concluding this part with a one note, a lot of the times when we talk about procurement towards a circular economy, we have one thing in mind, which is procurement of products with recycled content. And our whole attention goes to this. But there are a number of things we could do on this part. One is procurement for innovation, procuring product service systems, asset sharing models to increase resource utilization, contracts incentivizing collaborative innovation between upstream and downstream partners. So this is like a product owner talking with a recycling company to make sure that what is produced is recycling friendly. And you award the contract with the producer if that collaborative innovation is in place. And then there's also collaborative resource exchange arrangements, and quite a few things, reuse and buyback return model activation for existing contracts. So when you talk about the topic of circular procurements, there are a number of things you could do to existing contracts to encourage innovation, and also to shift to a new system, which is like a little bit more radical way. So my message is that it's not just a tiny continuous improvement that you can promote through something like procurement. It's also radical transformation to supply chains. And I thought I'll share a quick case study with you. So this is actually relating more to the downstream side of the supply chain. And I thought, because there are council professionals and public sector professionals, it might be useful for you because it's a very relevant one for public sector. So this is based on a webinar we did some time ago through Anvata. And these two gentlemen attended the webinar, and they have, in terms of their story, this is Marco from Contarina Spa attended, and also Stephen Thorpe, who's one of our collaborators. So Contarina Spa is an aggregated body of councils based in Italy. It is something like Westrock or Hunter Joint Organization, which provides an aggregated outcome for a couple of councils in the public sector. So SPA is actually the Italian word for company. So they operate as one entity. And one of the very interesting things to note here was that they were driving landfill diversion in a very steady and a consistent way over a couple of years. And so as you see, from 2000 to 2023, the last statistics, it's 90%. So diversion is not the only interesting thing here. They were diverting volume out of landfill while achieving value enhancement. And number two, they were also informing to change upstream consumption. So I'll explain how that's happened, but they were influencing disposal behavior of residents through some of the initiatives they launched. So it's not just about collecting waste in a reactive way. It's about collecting and managing waste to create value while influencing how people dispose waste and also how they produce things. So that's what makes this case study quite interesting from my perspective. So the three aspects I thought that worked well here. So one is service design, incentive design, and system design. So this is an example where they made it market competitive and heavily oriented towards the broader circular economy outcomes. I'll talk about each of them. So service design aspect, what did they do? They have a system where when a household let's say I move to Contadina area and I have an interview with one of the Contadina spa specialists to understand my household disposal needs. So it's heavily customized. And they have a conversation to design service options at the time of moving in. And they have a service portfolio, which is consisting of the base service, mobile, and drop-off services. So they understand household disposal behavior at collection with a lot of detail, and they customize their service proposition. I mean, it's not just you're not catering to one household, but their entire service portfolio, they customize it so that they aim high value material recovery. And so if you go to number 3 point, they talk about base service and mobile services. And this is how it happens. If you, for example, think of your base service as your curbside collection, you're paying a flat service fee for that. So if I'm imagine I have a beer can that I want to dispose. I dispose it through the base service. I pay a certain fee based on volume, which is weekly collection. And if I'm a bit more considerate and I want to provide high value material recovery, I would go to a drop-off point and drop the beer can off at a metal recovery center. So in that way, the council's cost for collection is less. They have given me a segregated waste. So your service fee reduces. You actually pay a reduced fee. Imagine I go to the other end. I have a party at my place. I have a big can of beers accumulated in my backyard, and I want to get rid of it. I'm happy to pay additionally and let them take it away. So I have on-demand pickup where I would call the council and say, I have a set of beer cans. I want it to be taken away, and I pay a higher fee. So based on what I want, I have van pickup, I have drop-offs, I have on-demand collection, I have base service, I have specialized service centers. So they have not just one service, but a range of services. You disincentivize convenience, or rather, if you want convenience, you pay additionally. If you give me a segregated waste, you pay less. If you give it to me at the place I want, in the way I want, you pay less. So you basically control the value equation through a set of incentives that are introduced into the system. And by not just providing one service, by a range of services that cater to the household needs in a more customized way. So, and also like the third point here, if you want to have an in-house compost facility, you give a reduction. So you kind of use pricing as an instrument here to control disposal behavior. And one of the interesting things that they noted was that they have this type of trucks and stopping at certain places, collecting different types of waste. So the service is very tailored to household needs. That's why you capture their needs in the beginning, but at the same time, heavily optimized. So for this type of system to work, there's, as you can see, there has to be a very thorough system design. So they invest a lot on information management, a lot on education, communication, a lot on learning from the system mistakes. So anything that sort of goes as a abnormality or there's an outlier, you always feedback and have meetings and sort of iron it off. So there's transparency and understanding of what costs the system. I mentioned here the statistics. There are 750 people engaged in the service, and nearly 20% of the staff are into system improvement and design, which is 1/5 of staff. So that's the investment they have made here. I think I'd like to conclude with that, and I talked about how a system worked with service incentive and system design, and also the role of procurement in making supply chains competitive towards a circular economy. I hand over to Caitlin.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mayuri. It's so interesting to hear such, your experience spanning globally, and also really interesting to see the comparison of an Italian HJO equivalent. So it's an interesting case study to prepare from both our speakers. We have a few questions in the chat, so I will go there first. We had a question from Sally Ann, and this one is a question for Chris, so we'll get him spotlighted up for a run in just a second. But Chris, Sally Ann has asked, many of the examples that you pointed to that were listed in your presentation were downstream related, though you did speak to the fact that HJO does like to look upstream as well. Do you think councils like those in the Hunter Joint organisation could assist with facilitating conversations to develop more onshore manufacturing and design of the original product so that we can link design and secondary processing together, thereby ensuring that products are actually reusable and recyclable to ensure the materials are kept at their highest utility? How much power have you got, Chris?
Thanks. Yeah, fortunately I saw that one about 10 minutes ago, so I've made some notes. Thank you, Sally. I think that's a great question. I think the upstream stuff is probably an area where certainly our councils have struggled a little bit to influence. However, I think we are starting to see some more movement in that area. I think there's a couple of examples that I can point to. A number of our councils are currently looking at changes and tweaks to the DCP and development guidelines, and ultimately what that's attempting to achieve is to influence the development sector, the private sector, to change the way that they deliver infrastructure that's ultimately handed over to council, or it's delivered in the LGA, so that it's meeting certain design requirements. For example, durability, or the ability to dismantle those buildings, the lifespan of those buildings, the maintenance requirements of those buildings, and as much as possible, trying to link those requirements or make sure that they're achievable in a local sense. That there are options for the materials if they are dismantled to feed into like a local processing facility, for example. There's local capability to achieve the outcomes that they're trying to do. Now that's it's a long-term process doing that. It can be really tricky because on the other side of that is that there's cost pressures, there's housing targets to deliver, so that councils need to be really cognizant of the fact that any or the impacts of any changes that they make to their DCP and planning frameworks don't sort of have a negative impact on other targets or other outcomes that they're trying to achieve. But that work is starting to occur. Of course, we're looking at procurement processes that embed and reward circularity as well. So sort of trying to change the way that services and products are provided to councils, or at least trying to ensure that the end of life of the products and services that are being procured by council are being considered and scored in a procurement process. Again, a big barrier for us is cost. It's right there at every turn, but I think the low carbon concrete project that we're looking at the moment is a really good example of that. We know the market's ready to provide that product, low carbon and recycled content concrete. It's something that's been done for a long time for other reasons, just for cost reasons, adding supplementary materials to concrete to bring down the cost. It's not new. It's just not super well understood in some areas, and it requires changes to procurement and design. Of course, concrete being quite a critical material and a structural material, the engineers that are sort of working with that product need to be confident that it's going to perform in the way that they wish. And then I think just another comment, like as a group of councils, the Hunter JO, we are involved in maybe more long-term strategic conversations about improving manufacturing capability in this region. The Hunter, for those that don't know it, is a massive coal exporting region. It's the biggest coal exporting region in the world, and with the expected decline of that industry over coming decades, there is a lot of interest in what do we do to replace the output and the jobs and the prosperity that's provided by that industry. Advanced manufacturing, circular economy manufacturing is one of those. So we're starting to work with the University of Newcastle, who are developing a new facility which is ultimately aimed at supporting manufacturing startups through some of the harder, more challenging early phases, and through the governance process of that, the facility that the clean energy precinct that they're developing at the university. We're represented on that committee, and the idea is that they want to support projects that are meeting needs for local government here in the region. So waste processing, circular economy remanufacturing is definitely one of those priorities. So we are involved in those conversations. I hope that answered your question, but give me a yell if you want to, if there's anything else you'd like to talk about.
Thanks, Chris. Mayuri, I'd love to hear your thoughts if you're up for it. I'm putting you on the spot here, but Chris specifically spoke to the Hunter's example and the transition in the Hunter with some of our more traditional industries. I'm not sure of the industrial makeup of the region in Italy that you've got as your case study, but interested to hear if any of what Chris has said has resonated with your understanding of their work in.
Sorry, if you could kindly mention the question. Is it more about supply chain resilience or?
Yeah, so relating to the question that Sally Ann asked, that Chris has asked, answered related to the Hunter, just wondered if you had any similar experiences with the work you've done with the Italian region.
That products are usable, recyclable. Okay, no, I just caught up on the question. So it's what she has mentioned is basically a lot of the initiatives are downstream focused, and we got to increase the upstream focus, definitely. And that's why we kind of got to find ways to influence behavior and influence design thinking upstream. So the case study I shared, it doesn't influence production directly. It influences the disposal behavior. So I don't have an idea of the exact makeup of the commercial, industrial, and the sort of, how do I say, proportions of economic contribution in that region. But in general, I think, related to one of the other questions on the chat as well, if you want to make supply chain transition, especially on the upstream, and to make it competitive, one of the sort of fears, you got to kind of remove the fears of manufacturers and producers on circular economy will actually reduce their revenue, because you're kind of talking about optimized production, reuse of products, which actually can drive down sales volume. So how do you give that assurance is a question. And ideally, in a circular economy, you want to dematerialize the economy. You want to have less materials flowing through the economy and more work on the materials that are in the supply chains. So ideally, when you shift to some of those alternatives, your product revenue should convert to service revenue. So as an example, if you have a washing machine being sold, your number of washing machines you sell would reduce because it'll be used for the entire technical life. There'll be repair and maintenance done. There'll be refurbishment, etc. But you would have services on repair. You would have services on refurbishment. You would have services on return, and you have your revenue mix shifting in a certain way. And it's to make sure that businesses would not do anything if it is unprofitable. You got to make the business case that you're getting ready for a future market. You're increasing your service revenue. You are reducing long-term supply chain risk because you avoid risk of extracting materials that would go scarce and increasing costs. You are influencing consumption of new generation buyers who would be ethical, market conscious, and regenerative conscious. So it's so far without direct policy and interventions on instruments like taxes, subsidies, which kind of make that happen. It's a little bit indirect. That's why it's harder. But yeah, I feel like if you talk to the business crowd and you want supply chain transition, the message that continuous improvements it's good, but it might not be enough. You might need to think of structural corrections of your supply chains to drive the type of change we want. And in doing that, how do you reduce risk and make it profitable for you, and have it not just tied to benefit, but also risk in the long run message. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. That's useful and great that you've been able to read through some of the other questions and merge a few answers together. I might pass to you then, Chris, for the Mary already partially answered this one, but Chris, do you have any thoughts on mandated extended producer responsibility and role that will play? Darren's put a very interesting question, specifically saying without mandated EPR, can we actually improve opportunities? So.
Yeah, thanks, Katie, and thanks, Darren. I have thought about this before, and again from a local government perspective, right? Like I made a comment in my presentation that local government often ends up being the sort of backstop for waste in New South Wales and in Australia, and the ultimate custodian of society's waste, and I think the impact of that is that it's the community, the people that live in those places, that ultimately pays for that. Local government generates its revenue through rates, almost entirely. So if you're asking them to handle more waste or invest in innovation, make changes, invest in infrastructure, whatever it may be, without the support of some other external revenue source, then it'll be the ratepayers that pay for that. I think that's a huge limitation in the way that waste and resource recovery services are delivered in Australia, or, for example, repair initiatives are delivered. I just don't think it's right for that to sit with government. I don't think it's productive, right? It's just going to increase costs for people. So I think EPR and stewardship schemes are extremely important. If companies are introducing products into the market, they need to be ultimately responsible for providing some funding. And I know that those schemes are often ultimately levied back to the consumer through increased price. I think the return and earn container deposit scheme is a good example of that. It's 10-cent rebate, but that 10 cents gets tacked onto the sale of the drink. But it is a user pay. It ultimately becomes a user pays, and the companies become responsible for participating in that financial mechanism. So I think that's, it's going to be critical to set up material specific solutions. Textiles, there's a lot of interest in stewardship and EPR schemes for textiles and clothing in Australia at the moment. I think that's really important to ensure that you've got not only the processing infrastructure, but the collection infrastructure, and that the community understand, or the users of that service have been reached through a communication scheme, campaign that actually builds their awareness and their capacity to participate in that scheme. So short answer, I think, I guess maybe it's possible that you could get improvements, but I think extended producer responsibility schemes are probably the most equitable and effective way of financing those kind of mechanisms to get results.
Perfect, thank you. And right on 12 o'clock. So thank you. I unfortunately won't go through any other questions we have, but I do just want to point out that a great resource has been put into the chat there. If you put in the link for northsearegion.eu, you'll be able to find additional inspiration for innovative and circular economy procurement for private public entities, including market engagement. So thank you so much for the contribution in the chat there. And then sorry for anyone that we didn't get to, but really appreciate everyone's time for joining us today and being a part of this webinar. The recording will be put onto Boomerang Labs, our YouTube playlist, where you can find all of our other other webinar recordings, but thank you so much for joining us on Thursday, and thank you, Mary and Chris, for your time, and looking forward to seeing you all online another time.
Thank you.
Thank you.